So Camille, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
Super. Thanks, everyone. I am so delighted to join you, and I really wish it were in person. Because you're not logged into this Zoom call, I'm going to rely on Judith and my friend Christy to convey to me if you are unwilling to shout out a question but have one, please let them know. I'm delighted to take questions or to adjust my rate of presentation or whatever will make this more enjoyable for you. So we're going to spend some time today with a new-ish resource that I'm hoping you will, if you've not already, try to be interested in incorporating in the work you do. Let me just share that the time we're spending together today is going to start with an overview of a few key concepts that I think are essential to the overview of the presentation. I'll then give you a brief introduction to personas and share, I hope, examples that you'll find useful in the work that you're doing. And just to be clear, I think if you are finding that your adult learners are unmotivated, distracted, overcommitted, disengaged, stressed, that I'd like to offer the idea that I think personas can help with that. The other thing I'm also going to share is that you bring to this conversation far more expertise in teaching than I do. So I hope that you'll approach our time together as an opportunity to listen and to think and to take away what works for you, which may be one idea or resource, or maybe three ideas and resources. But please, some of you who I wish I could be in the room with right now have heard part of this presentation before. And so please just sit back and coast during that part and pay attention when it sounds new or interesting. But I also want to make sure that you know that the handout for today's presentation is going to be available to you electronically, as will the slides. So anything that I'm sharing today, you will have full access to. Just to let you know, the way that the handout is organized is in exactly the way that I'm going to be talking. So I'm going to start with a couple definitions. And what you should see at the top of your handout is key terms, and you'll see the resources that I'm going to mention. One of the reasons that I think definitions are really important is because words paint tremendously powerful pictures. And one of the best examples I've seen of this recently is the images that were painted for a mother in Pennsylvania named Lauren Talhelm when she found out she was going to have a child with Down syndrome. What she found when she went to the medical books was the picture that you see on the right, which defined a child with Down syndrome in terms that largely were not positive or engaging. So she created a counterpart definition. This is her son, Hayden, who is now in an inclusive kindergarten classroom. And I just wanted to start this section by sharing a couple definitions that you may want to incorporate in what you're doing as a way for students to possibly shift some of the ideas they have about supporting each and every child. So the first definition is the definition of inclusion. And for many of us, at the point at which we entered the early childhood field, inclusion meant disability. And often we would see courses like the Introduction to Young Children with Exceptionalities in North Carolina, 221 for Christy and others, which was a course that was largely organized by the Disability of the Week. So they would talk about children with cerebral palsy and children with speech and language delays. And part of what we now have grown in our appreciation of is that there's no child for whom a single characteristic defines who they are or how we prepare future educators to support them. And this is from just a document that came out in 2021, underscoring that we need to recognize and value all child differences, that children have many and intersecting identities, one of which may be disability. What that means is that there are opportunities to use personas and other mechanisms to incorporate the concept of inclusion in any course you teach. This is an article that you have a link to in your handout that's about inclusive seating. And it basically talks about the fact that in some classrooms, there's an expectation that children will all sit exactly the same way and learn as well, each as well as the other. And one of the most common terms for how those children are expected to sit is crisscross applesauce. Now, part of what's delightful about this article is it basically unpacks the concept of what if crisscross applesauce isn't comfortable for every child, or isn't orthopedically desirable for every child, or isn't possible for every child? How could we instead think about ways that children can sit and be as comfortable as possible while they're learning? So it's a terrific short article that takes a really different view of inclusion in seating, and it makes us wonder about things like, could we want to have images of inclusion that look like this? Or might we want to have a conversation with the children, or prepare students to have a conversation with children about how do you really like to sit when you're listening really hard or when you're learning really well? This is what one classroom of preschoolers came up with. These are the ways they like to sit and learn. So one of the visual supports in the classroom is this chart with ways to sit. And just for those of you who really love using children's books as a vehicle for teaching, I'll apologize that this is a very blurry picture, but there's a delightful children's book called All Are Welcome that is about inclusion in its many forms. And part of what you see in that book is this picture of inclusive seating. So just wanted to sort of let you know how I was going to be using the term inclusion. Here's another reason that you might want to really be more thoughtful and more proactive in the way you use this term. I'm sure all of you are familiar with this relatively new publication that Linda Espinoza and Sue Bradykamp essentially worked on for 3 years to come up with a new vision for high quality preschool curriculum. And part of what they did in this report, and again, you have a link to it, is to focus on what has been done well in supporting preschool education in the US and what has not been done as well as it might be. There's a separate chapter, for example, on young children who are multilingual or dual language learners. Chapter 6 focuses on children with disabilities. And just as an idea for a concept that you might want to incorporate in your teaching, take a look at this quote, which says, focusing on the needs of children with disabilities has the potential to improve the educational experiences for all children. It goes on to talk about the fact that the skills that general education teachers develop to teach children with disabilities more effectively will ultimately benefit all children. A terrific tool for helping students practice supporting children with very different learning needs and priorities is Personas, which you'll learn more about in a minute. Another resource that I wanted to mention to you, another definition that you'll hear me using, is the definition of professional development in early childhood. And part of what this definition reminds us of is that professional development, whether it's happening in a workshop or happening in a college course, involves the transaction in which adult learners acquire knowledge, skills, and dispositions, and they also show us what they know and are able to do by applying those. And the 3 different components that we're always thinking about as we design the most effective courses in early childhood is, who are the learners? I know some of the people in the room, and I wish I could be there just to point to each of you and say, I know that the learners that you're supporting in this community are different than the learners you're supporting in this community. And so that's always one of the things that you're thinking about. Then also the content that you're delivering and how that content is organized so your students have opportunities as part of their experiences to learn, to safely practice, and to apply what they've learned. And one of the things I'm hoping you will leave with today is the idea that personas provide both tremendous opportunities for learning, practicing, and applying. One additional concept that I want to remind you of is the idea of really connecting what we do to evidence, and how important it is for our students to see, as individuals who are embarking on or continuing a journey of professionalism in the early childhood field, how important it is that they know where to go for solid evidence. And I'm going to share several examples today, But one idea that I thought you might be interested in is a concept that was created by a community college colleague, Jennifer Cole, in Wisconsin. And I had talked with her about how important it is for our students to really have their own early childhood professional bookshelf, that place they go for ideas, for solid information. My early childhood professional bookshelf has a binder with just the standards and competencies, the position on DAP, and other resources I look to frequently. But this is an example of a Padlet that Jennifer created for her students. So anytime her students were having a conversation, and one of the things that she wanted to ask them was, well, what does the NAEYC position on developmentally appropriate practice say about that? Her students like that could go into that website and find that document. So each of these categories has within it documents. It's also a tool that enables her, as part of any assignment, to say, here's the question that you need to answer. Please provide the source for or sources for your answer. And this professional bookshelf is a place students can go to support their answers and to really begin the practice of looking for evidence within our field to support the work they do. So those are a couple definitions. And I also want to remind you of just several frameworks that I'm going to be mentioning and unpacking as part of the time that we talk about personas. One of them is developmentally appropriate practice. And my guess is that each and every one of you in some form incorporates DAP in your work. One of the things that I continue to discover as I work with faculty members across the country is often when I ask, what does developmentally appropriate practice mean to you? The answer that I get is, it's what we expect of children at a particular age. And that's actually chronologically appropriate practice. And it's a component of DAP, but it's not the whole picture. So one of the things that I'd like to encourage you to think about, and personas are a way to do that, is how much you bring the framework of DAP to any course you teach. And I'll give you some examples in a minute, because developmentally appropriate practice actually incorporates the ability to put together three kinds of consideration. One of them is commonality, or what might we expect of a child of a particular age. But then there also are individual considerations, and also how we always incorporate consideration of a child's context, their family, their community. What that means is, in whether it's a child development course or a curriculum course or a language and literacy course, you can use a persona to really help your students understand the importance of, first of all, finding out what might it even be appropriate to expect of a child this age. And then if this happens to be a child who also has a home language other than English, what else do you need to consider? And if this happens to be a child who has recently experienced trauma in the form of a loss of a family member, what else do you need to think about for this child as a learner? So personas become a tremendous vehicle for really looking at the core, all three core considerations of DAP. A second framework that I will be using today to think about is the framework of universal design for learning, which helps us think about how can we, as part of our role as educators, both demonstrate and expect our students to demonstrate how they can represent different concepts, engage children in different ways, and support children in really showing us what they know and are able to do. I think you're probably all aware that whether you're looking through an NAEYC lens or a DEC, the Division for Early Childhood, which is the part of the Council for Exceptional Children, emphasis on universal design for learning is something that is increasing dramatically because it's such a fabulous framework for supporting each and every child. One of the things that I was planning to bring today to pass around, but you have a link to this in your handout, there's a fabulous article. And if you haven't seen this, I really encourage you to explore it. It's an article that's called Circle is for Everyone: Using Universal Design for Learning to Promote Inclusion During Circle Times. And what this does is it takes one portion of a typical day in a program for young children, circle time, and it applies a universal design for learning lens to look at different ways that an educator can support each child through the ways in which he or she organizes circle time. So I wanted to make sure that you knew that there's some fabulous examples. One of the things I love about articles like this that say, here's what universal design for learning might look like at circle time, is you can use this as an opportunity for students to learn and to practice. And then with a persona, you can have them apply what they might do differently during choice time, during outdoor play. You can apply the same model as a really full-bodied assignment. The last framework that I want to mention to you is a set of practices and resources that were developed by the Division for Early Childhood. Many of these are available in forms. This is actually the third page of your handout. There are readily available checklists, practice guides that have vignettes and video clips. But one of the things that I really enjoy sharing is the practices that have been identified as effective for children with disabilities, and also to an extremely large extent for each and every child, come in a form with examples. So if one of the things that you wanted to do was share examples of what real inclusion looks like, you don't need to make those up, because, for example, in thinking about creating environments that really support each and every child, or environments that support inclusion and seating, here are some examples of what that might look like in an early childhood classroom, or how a physical therapist might support that. So I just wanted to make sure that you knew that there's a document that has all of these examples for you to incorporate in the work that you do. So now, after that long introduction, I want to give you a brief overview of what's a persona. So personas are short stories. Many of you are probably already using vignettes or case studies. Case studies tend to be much longer and have far more information. Both case studies and vignettes tend to be written documents. One of the things that characterizes personas is that there is always a completely engaging photograph of the child that the persona is named after. So I want to just unpack for you some of the things that are always going to be a part of any persona. And one is the age of the child. So one of the reasons that a persona always tells you that is because it allows you to then say to your students, so what might we expect in terms of the social and emotional development of a 4-year-old? It's that link to what might be expected, and then an opportunity to think about this child and to think about what skills might be the ones that you would want to target next, or how you might drop back if this child were behind in certain areas. The second thing that you'll always find in a persona is information about the family and the context. So you learn, for example, that Jamil's family speaks Aramaic and Arabic at home. His family is learning English. He understand a bit about that he has an older sister. The family came here from Syria. You also will see in every persona information about what delights a child. And here you see that he has a tremendous interest in blocks, loves to build tall and elaborate structures. Why do we always put in something about what delights a child? Here's one reason. One of the things that your counterparts and colleagues in community college education across the country often mention is how hard it is for their students to understand ways in which to use the interests of children to build curriculum, or how much the interests of children and their ability to make choices about those interests is connected to behavior. So one of the reasons we always have that information in a persona is so students have opportunity to practice developing those skills safely with a persona child before they're actually thrown into a situation where they might need to do that on the ground. Part of what you also see here is information about Jamil's individual learning needs. Just the teacher has noticed that introducing and reinforcing concepts in a sequence is something that really helps him. You know that his teacher is interested in helping him really develop his language skills. And you also get to see a bit about just some of the key professional development priorities. His teacher has shared ideas about how to support his developing language. And so one of the things you might ask students to do is to say, what are some of the evidence-based resources for helping families discover how to support a child's language and literacy development? And then something else that is often part of a persona is a link to unique characteristics of the community in which the child is growing up. The Jamil persona happens to be one that I developed for a community college in San Diego, where a very significant number of the students who attend this community college are Syrian immigrants who speak Arabic and Aramaic. So one of the things we wanted to do was create some personas that they could relate to and really provide their personal insights to supporting. Because part of what you'll notice here is Jamil's parents have said that they're reluctant to play with him because that's not customary in their culture. So one of the other things to explore with this particular persona might be, how would you interact with Jamil's family to really think about ways in which they could support his language development? So I've just unpacked for you a persona, and any persona has those characteristics. Something I wanted to quickly review is personas were used a tiny bit before the pandemic. During the pandemic, when there was no access to children and families, I really fleshed out the initial collection and started working with others to create personas so that there were diverse children and families for students to use, so that faculty members could construct situations, scenarios, assignments in which students got to practice with the very kinds of children and families they weren't able to directly interact with. The other reason that personas have been developed is to address specific professional development priorities. So personas aren't just nice stories. They're stories that really can support faculty members such as yourselves in giving students practice and learning more about areas that they're particularly interested in. So we did a survey of early childhood faculty in Michigan to say, what are the most difficult concepts to teach? You see those on the screen right now, and those are the concepts that, as we were developing a set of Michigan personas, the developers always had in mind. Is this a story that we could use to teach about using culturally responsive practices? So personas really have very strong instructional and pedagogical intent. Then the third component, and you already heard me mention this a little bit, we now know that adult learners, and particularly community college students, and you have the references for this, are more successful in completing their programs when instructional content is connected to their lives. The more we can use examples that resonate with the lived experiences of our adult learners, the more likely they are to be engaged in those assignments, that learning. And part of what's so important about that, as the lives of our adult learners are reflected and discussed in detail, it also models for them the importance of doing those very things with the children and families that they either are working with or will be working with. So I also need to pair this with the fact that one of the things we know is that culturally responsive or materials that reflect the lives of our students aren't always readily available. I'm working with a community now in North Carolina where 62% of the residents, and Christy, you'll know which county this is, I bet, 62% of the residents are American Indian, their heritage is American Indian. They have never seen images of children who look like them or who reflect their background in the instructional resources they've used with their students. So personas become a way to do that. And so that's how stories like Jamil get started. So I'm going to stop there and just see if there are any questions. And if there are questions, please just say them and I'll be glad to try to answer. This is also a point to say you're going too fast. or you're going too slow. Anything? All right, let me then continue. So I thought it might be helpful to unpack some personas for you in terms of how you might use them in a course, or just how in specific courses you might incorporate personas. So let's start with Jamil. And let's say that one of the things that you want your students to understand is what are the assets for children of being bilingual, or what is the process through which children acquire a second language? Or what are ways to support children who are multilingual and their families? And a persona like Jamil would be a great way to do that. And here are some examples. So one of the kinds of resources that you have on your handout is some resources on the importance of home language. And part of what they reveal in just nicely formatted one-page overviews is the benefits to children in terms of their educational trajectory of growing and learning in both their home language or languages and the language of instruction. So one of the things that you might do, and this is a community college colleague organized her child, family, and community course in a way that every other week students had an assignment that was done through a discussion board. And there would be a different persona presented. And what students needed to do was to, a challenge was posed. Students needed to respond to that challenge. And along with responding, bring an evidence-based resource. So 1 week, for example, you might pose to your students the idea that Jamil's parents, who speak Arabic and Aramaic, are just learning English, have come to you as Jamil's teacher and said, would it be best for him if we just spoke English at home? What would you say? And the discussion board could then center about how you would respond to that and the resources that you would use to back that answer up. So it becomes just a great opportunity to apply knowledge of family engagement to a particular situation. Another resource that is on your handout, I'm willing to bet that most of you are already familiar with these, but this section of materials that's called Specific Strategies to Support Dual Language Learners When Adults Do Not Speak Their Language is a treasure trove for students. And one of the things you might do, again, as part of a conversation, as part of an activity, as part of a discussion board, is, and there are many other personas that have languages that might be more common in the community in which you live. But again, you could use Jamil and ask your students to share one evidence-based strategy for supporting a dual language learner like Jamil in his classroom. And part of what they would need to share is the resource and where they found that. So it becomes a chance for students. You don't need to stop and give a full session lecture on young children who are dual language learners. Instead, what you provide is a vehicle for students to access and apply these ideas using a persona. For those of you who haven't discovered it yet, there's a fabulous set of 4 videos about a little girl named Soyul who has only ever spoken Korean at home, comes to preschool, and her family says in preschool we want her to speak English. And what you see is over a series of 4 videos, that process. So if one of the things you'd like your students to really learn is how that process unfolds, you could use a video persona like Soyul to talk about specific strategies that they might use. So let's turn now to Trey. I'd like you to meet Trey. He's 30 months old. And for those of you who like to read the ending of the book before you read the first part of the book to see how it's going to turn out, you probably have found that there is a set of a list of sources of personas. So each of the personas I'm sharing with you is a persona you can access. And so I wanted to make sure that you knew that. I'm not dangling these in front of you without any chance of being able to get to them. But let's just take a quick look at Trey, 30 months old, lives with his mom. She has some intellectual challenges, but takes really, really good care of him. She's recently found a job, so he is in a family childcare program. And So here's a little guy who has been well cared for, but hasn't been with other children, hasn't had some of those experiences we think as readiness experiences. And in his childcare program, what his teacher is seeing is that there are things he really loves, but things he avoids. He doesn't like to do fine motor activities, and he's also not able to really talk about his feelings. He's just getting really frustrated as he interacts with other children. So how might Trey be a persona that you would ask students to use? This could be part of, again, a child family community course. And this is a way to apply the lens or the framework of DAP to a persona, or show how you might use a persona to pull out and then integrate the components. You could always ask what you might expect of a child Trey's age. But thinking about his mom, who has some intellectual challenges, one of the things that you might ask students to really think about and supply ideas for is strategies they would use to collaborate with his mother. So they're not going to send home research articles, but what might they do instead to really support this family? And you might also ask them to propose ways that they would support his language, fine motor, and social emotional development within the routines of childcare. So literally set out the day in terms of routines and ask students, they can do it in pairs, they can do it individually, to identify specific strategies they would use to support this child. Another example, I don't know how many of you teach the infant toddler course, but there's a whole set of infant toddler personas. And one of the personas, again, I told you there's always a completely heart-meltingly engaging photo. This is Piper, 14 months old. And part of what you learn as you read the persona is that Piper has Down syndrome. Her family is they're high school graduates, they have full-time jobs, know nothing about Down syndrome, but are learning. She attends a neighborhood childcare program and is seeing a speech language pathologist to support her speech and language development. And you also learn a little bit about, just her interest in rolling balls. She's starting to play with puzzles. And so you would see just some ideas about Piper. And I'm sure you're already thinking about how you might use Piper in a class that you teach. One idea would be to introduce your students to this terrific guide to adaptations, which is a way to apply universal design for learning to anything that goes on in an early learning setting. So how to think about the different size, shape, and material of balls so they'll support each child who may be rolling that ball. So one of the things you might do is have that as a guide that your students would look through and get ideas from. You might have them practice with the idea of individualizing by watching a video like the one that is here and is listed on your handout. And then you may have them apply what they know about Piper by thinking about how they would adapt the things that go on at home or the things that go on in a program to support her learning. And just in case you have not discovered them yet, there is a terrific set of resources about inclusive learning environments for infants and toddlers. And I would take you back at this point to where I started, which is in the definition of inclusion. I think as your students learn how to individualize with specific children in mind, what they're learning is how to support each and every child. So while historically, when we would see a title like inclusive learning environments, what we might think, this isn't going to be relevant to my course. In fact, it really, truly is. And I encourage you to check out resources like this. So let's take a look now at Joseph. And Joseph is the third Joseph in his family. He is in kindergarten and he loves dinosaurs, animals, plants. This is a blossoming scientist. Just everything says that anything to explore is something he's really interested in. His family is a family that, again, Christy and I might recognize in North Carolina, a family that really can trace its roots back to slavery and an era in which Black individuals were not allowed to read, and the only way in which families maintained a history and cultural traditions was through the oral tradition of storytelling. And at home, that's exactly what goes on. Just, people talk and share stories, and stories are alive and acted out and engaged by adults in Joseph's environment. But the way reading's being taught, with everybody listening to and looking at one book, is what he thinks is really boring. So in a language and literacy course, what might you do? And one of the things that you might do is introduce an evidence source like this one, which did some research on different ways to support young children developing their literacy. And what our colleagues at the University of North Carolina discovered is that there's a strategy that's really terrific for supporting any young blossoming learner. And that's the practice of retelling a story. So we often have, we'll read a story and then have children retell the story. It turns out that's a great story. That's a great practice for anybody. But for young Black children, and particularly for Black boys, who may have grown up in an environment in which storytelling is how you pay attention, listen, expand, learn, it's a fabulous strategy. So what would it be like as part of a language and literacy course to include a resource like this, and to include the Joseph persona, and then to pursue conversations about how you might use his interest in science to support literacy development, or how you might have a conversation with his family about books and reading in their home, and see if you can learn more about that connection and build on it. And just there are other ideas here, but I mostly wanted to say that personas become tremendously rich vehicles for making connections with DAP, with just other frameworks within a particular course. And I'd like to give you just a couple more ideas about what that might look like. So I wanted to introduce you, if you've not already discovered it, to a particular resource from a project called STEMI. STEMI has a website that I encourage you to visit because it has lots and lots of resources. But it's a project that has really focused on integrating concepts related to science, technology, engineering, and math, and family engagement, and language, and literacy, and individualizing for each child. So again, thinking about perhaps your language and literacy course, one of the things that you'll find on the STEMI site is examples of children's books and ideas for how to explore children's books that have to do with STEM concepts, even in infant and toddler courses. Also, one of the things that's a phenomenal potential assignment is to have your students create STEMI bookmarks. So this is a bookmark, you're seeing it right now. And each bookmark has a number of things. So in this area right here, part of what you see is different formats in which you can access this particular book. And there are story bookmarks like this, I would say, for at least 20 different children's books that are very commonly used. But one of the things that this emphasizes is different formats in which you can access this story. So for families for whom purchasing a book is not going to be a good option, there are other ways that they can view this online, listen to this story, listen to it, and discuss it with their children. So that connection to family is part of the bookmark. Then there also are vocabulary words broken out, ideas for extending the learning broken out, and there also are specific aspects of the story that support individualizing. So, for example, in this story, what you see are the icons of each of the images in the story, including the ladybug, which could be used to help young children who are dual language learners develop the vocabulary labels for both their home language and English. For children who may be using a communication device, it's a way to program that. So one of the terrific assignments that you might consider is having your students create a bookmark like this for one of the persona children. So it would be a book that would respond to the child's interests, be a way to connect with the child's family, just an idea for your consideration. So we're back to Trey. You have met Trey before, and I wanted to just give you another idea of a kind of assignment that you could use in many courses. You could take a child like Trey, a persona like Trey, and knowing what he's interested in and what he's not interested in. One of the things that you can do is have your students, because I think increasingly what we're really wanting our students to do is to use technology effectively so that they both develop that facility and are able to use it in their teaching. So let's take a look at a resource you may not have discovered yet. There is an amazing woman in Pennsylvania named Mary Hall. Every month, Mary Hall sends out a new edition of what's called Learning is Everywhere. And this is one example of a Learning is Everywhere issue that happens to be We're Learning in the Neighborhood. She has examples for infants, for toddlers, for preschoolers, and I think for kindergarteners also, of ways that you can explore a setting for children of any age. And it can be a setting at home, it can be a setting in the community. But what she also has is examples of children's books. These are and they're archived. These are a terrific learning resource. But imagine what it might be like if you asked students, and these are real examples from community college students who had an assignment involving Learning is Everywhere. So what they needed to do was, first of all, identify a setting. And this happened to be in a course that emphasizes math, science, and literacy. So it was a curriculum-based course emphasizing those concepts. And what the instructors found is that their students would dive right into literacy and often avoid math and science. So what they did instead was to give them an assignment to create a poster for how to support learning about math or science for children of a particular age. And what you see here is Learning is All Around Us, grocery store edition for 2- and 3-year-olds. They had more fun and did a terrific job with these. But what the instructor then did afterwards was to present the students with personas that matched the age of their poster and ask them to also identify any specific adaptations or modifications that would really make this a set of ideas that would support that young learner. So Learning is All Around Us can be a great assignment. One more persona, I promise. The example I hear most frequently from faculty members of an area of concern is social and emotional development. I think some of this is post-pandemic, but some of it is just for adults, for children, that there are really, there's a real need to pay attention to wellness and particularly mental health. So this is Jackson. Jackson is off the chart smart. His parents, they have no idea how they got such a brilliant little guy. He is significantly above age in every area. And he starts each day with a million questions about the metric system or animals or whatever he saw on TV. But in his classroom, he is the first to finish when the children have an activity of any kind, of art specifically. In a small group, he's the first to raise his hand. He wants to share the answer. When the teacher calls on someone else, he says wrong. And his teacher is really concerned about his behavior, how it's impacting the other children, and how to individualize the curriculum to support his talents. So imagine that you're teaching a course, and one of the things you want your students to think about is how to support a child who has some behavioral considerations. What you're seeing here is an assignment that was completed by a community college student, an assignment that was linked to the Jackson persona, in which students needed to think about what was happening. I think they've amplified the fact that we don't yet know that Jackson's peers are crying. But this becomes an opportunity to apply content from a course on child guidance to how a teacher could support Jackson, and also to really look at how to support his self-efficacy, his self-regulation, what can happen in the classroom to really support him as an individual. And again, I want to underscore how much this is not just going to support Jackson, but his peers as well. And then one of the things that I keep encouraging is, as part of the assignment, students needed to also share their evidence sources, which included, as you can see, things from the course text. So that's just one more example for you. One of the other ways you can use personas, and this is particularly helpful in any kind of a course where students will be expected to create lesson plans, to plan centers and opportunities, typically curriculum courses. One of the things that you can do is at the beginning of the semester or prior to an assignment, share with your students that as part of that assignment, these are 3 of the children who will be part of the group they're designing an activity for, a center for. So one of the hardest things to simulate for our students is what it's like to individualize for more than one child. And this can provide an opportunity to practice applying concepts like universal design for learning to support more than one child simultaneously. So students can be thinking about how to create a center or how to support a small group activity in which each of these learners will be likely to be successful. So that's just one more example of the way personas can be used. So I'm going to stop there. And while you're thinking about whether or not you have any questions for me, I want to point you to page 2, and you probably went right through the set of finding personas. All of those are examples that are available for you. Most of the persona collections are available as PDFs, and if you should wish to have them in document form so that you can add details or add an additional chapter to the story or modify them for a particular course, contact me and I'll be glad to give you those in document form. But let me stop talking and see, are there any questions?
Any questions for Camille?
I have a question.
Molly, go ahead.
I apologize if I didn't catch this earlier, but do you also prompt your students to write their own personas? Is that right? Like, are you always creating the personas for them? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's next, and I'll actually share a couple examples with you. But let me do that now while it's pertinent to your question. So one of the things that that you'll have a link to in your handout is a set of ideas from a faculty member who has her students create personas. And you can do that just in a face-to-face setting where you literally have the infant group, the toddler group, the preschool group from personas that students created. And if you think students get invested in the personas that you have access to, wait till you see how invested they are in linking to the family and supporting a child they created. It's a really great strategy. We actually have, another marvelous example. An instructor here in North Carolina taught the first half of a course using a persona, a little preschooler named Stella. And she used Stella to say, so this is what the law says, this is how you could individualize for Stella, this is how you could support peer interactions for Stella, and everything was key to Stella. The second half of the course, students created a persona, and it needed to think about the same features. What does this child really like? What don't they like? What's their family? What are individual learning categories? And students then applied the same things that they practiced with Stella to their persona. And it was a very, very successful assignment. Anything else?
I don't see any other questions, Kim.
Okay, let me then close with a couple additional pieces. One is evidence for the use of personas. Part of what I have compiled is evidence from just reports interacting with people who have used them, and also one study that I'll share with you in a minute. So we have heard from instructors, from field experience supervisors, and from students. The one word that we hear the most is personas make the story relatable, that it is so much easier for students to to relate to and to apply themselves to assignments in which personas are involved. And you can glimpse some of that here. What I want to share with you, the course that I mentioned in which the instructor used Stella for the first half of the course and students created their own personas for the second half of the course, these are two student assessments of what that was like. And students said something, I feel like being able to use Stella's persona as an example throughout these last few weeks has made it a lot easier to understand the material. And we've been able to use these examples in order to help us out in real life situations in the future. I also wanted to share one more because increasingly we're telling students this is a new way of teaching and what did you think? The assignment I liked the most was the persona project. I like that I had a child in mind who needed my support and felt like I was actually advocating for him. So we've gotten great feedback. Part of what I wanted to do today, and I have sign-up sheets for you, is there are three sources of information, of resources that can support you in using personas. Some of you may already get these listservs. Baby Talk is a one-way listserv with content for families and professionals related to the birth to 36 months age. And each issue has new research, just practical strategies, comes out once a month. Natural Resources is different. It comes out once a month. It's all free resources, birth to 8. But each issue of Natural Resources is on a different topic. So one may be using child preferences. One may be mindfulness. So each issue is on a different topic. And the third is, I don't know if any of you already receive Faculty Finds, but it's a listserv out of the University of Washington that has free, readily available content and pedagogical resources for faculty. What I was going to do was pass around a sign-up sheet. If any of you would like to receive these, I will be glad to sign you up. And perhaps if time permits, Judith, I can impose on you to ask people to clearly print their name and email address so I can transcribe that and let me know which of these you'd like. And then Judith, if you would kindly just take a picture and send them to me, I'll be glad to sign people up for these different listservs that can, I think, help them maybe find some other resources to support the use of personas.
Absolutely. So do that.
Super. This is questions while I show you these last two slides. I really like and subscribe to the idea that hearts and minds are changed through stories. I think personas become stories that we can use to connect students on an ongoing basis with frameworks and with practices that are evidence-based. So with that, I want to thank you for allowing me to be here virtually with you. I would welcome any questions. You have my email address, and if you'd like to email to me instead, that would be great. But thank you so much for letting me be with you today to share this time.
Yep.
So with that, thanks everyone.
Thanks, Camille. We appreciate your time today.
Okay, bye everybody.
Take care.